Welcome to the magical journey beyond mediocrity, where the mystical and the practical become aligned. You're listening to Meant for More, the Seeker's Guide to Success, with your host, Seeker's Guide and coach, Kristen Lloyd. Kristen guides you through mindset shifts to increase your consciousness and live your best life. So let's leave mediocrity behind and step into your magical, magnificent life with Kristen.
Welcome back, everyone, to Meant for More, the Seeker's Guide to Success. I am your host and Seeker's Guide, Kristen Lloyd, and today we have an amazing show set up for you. We have Debbie Lacy with us today. Debbie is a life coach, writer, and TEDx speaker. She's the author of Ready, Set, Manifest, a handbook for the in-betweens and leaps in life. Debbie's Call to Leap course series, Whisper, Stories, and Promises, gives women the practices and tools required to stop waiting and start living their dreams. Welcome, Debbie. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much. Really great to be here. Thanks.
I always start off with what has been your journey to more. I think that as part of the Meant for More process, everyone has a journey in their life that has gained them and gotten them to this point. So I would love for you to share with our audience today, what has been your journey to more? What has been your journey to where you are today?
It's such a great question, and it's a big question too, right? So when I think about this, I think about a time maybe about 13 years ago when I was really struggling. It started way before that, but I was in my previous career as a social worker, and I really thought that was going to be my life. I had studied for it, undergrad, grad school, taken even some time off to really make sure that was the path I wanted to do, and found myself in a career doing that work that was really unsuited to me. And it was really hard to come to that realization, but I had done just about everything in that field and still ended up feeling really stressed out, overwhelmed, and just like I had no real meaning to what I was doing. And it wasn't that the work wasn't meaningful or the people I worked with weren't, really wonderful to be working with. It was just that way of working with people wasn't a fit for me. So I went through burnout. I got completely burned out, ended up in urgent care in the middle of a workday once, and it was my wake-up call. And I was having symptoms that were really scary to me. I couldn't complete sentences that day, and had to go through all these tests to make sure that nothing really horrible was wrong with me. I knew the moment it happened that It was stress. I mean, I knew it. I didn't need the doctor to tell me that. I knew it. So that was the turning point for me. And that was my journey to more began that day, because to me, that was my bottom. I mean, not being able to communicate, literally not being able to communicate, to being totally overwhelmed and unsure about my physical health. That to me was unacceptable, completely unacceptable, and not the way I wanted to be living.
Was it just stress, or were you having symptoms of anxiety and panic attacks, or?
Leading up to that, I had lots of little signs. Some of them, now looking back, were pretty huge, but I chalked them up to being tired. I just said, I have a really stressful job. If I just get some rest, it'll be okay. And what was happening was I was having problems with my speech and my cognitive function. And it just kept getting worse and worse until that day when I could not speak anymore. I couldn't finish my sentences in the middle of the day. I was surrounded by a group of kids, and luckily had a couple of coworkers there that I could turn to and kind of manage to say, I'm not doing well at all. I need to go to the doctor. And so they got me to urgent care right away.
So how did that bottom, as you call it, shift you in your work and shift you to take on a new role and also do the self-care? Because clearly stress is something that's caused by many things or multiple things, but how did you shift that to really take care of you?
Mm-hmm. I remember in that moment, talking to my supervisor and taking some time off and really reflecting on what had happened, how I had gotten to that point, and what was going to need to change. And it was the start of a very long journey, I will say, but the front runner around, where my priorities needed to be at that time was on self-care. And to me, that started with articulating my needs. And I had to admit to something that I hadn't wanted to admit to for a very long time. And that was the work that I was doing was not a fit for me. And that was scary to admit that. But I went to my supervisor and with all of this drama as a backdrop, I said, I think what's happening is I can no longer do this work, and I'm not quite sure what to do next. And that was such a great thing for me to do. And thank goodness I had the most amazing supervisor. She remains my mentor to this day. And I will call out her name because she was just one of those people that I give so much credit to for the choices that I ended up making and the path that I took. And her name was Carrie Height. And she's a good friend of mine. And she listened. Thank goodness she listened, and she asked me a lot of questions. And what ended up happening, she ended up putting me in a new position where I had less direct service work over time, less and less, so that I was able to go into management, supervising, program development, all these things. And that day of being in urgent care was just, like I said, a moment in my life where I had to face some things. There was no more saying, minimizing that I could do. There was no more avoiding. Everything was right there in my face. Me at the hospital in the middle of a workday, completely vulnerable. And there was no other choice but to face what I needed to face in that moment. And luckily, I had that support around me. I had some great friends, a great partner at the time, and I had this wonderful woman who mentored me through a process that ended up changing my whole career over time. So that was really what did it for me.
Wow, that's amazing. And as you really took care of you, how did that shift your business and your career? Because now you do a lot of work with women, especially this Call to Leap course series. And how has this really helped you to transition into that work?
Yes, it did, so much so because of having that personal experience. And what happened was I got on this path of eventually leaving my career because even though I wasn't doing the direct service work anymore, then I had a new problem. I was bored. So I just wasn't happy anyway. I could not get myself satisfied within that career path. And it was really sad to finally realize I had to let it go and find something new. And that was scary. So I ended up getting a call from a former colleague of mine who had become a life coach, and she needed to work with some people pro bono as part of her certification process. And I signed up for that. And in the beginning, I was trying to figure out how to have more balance in my life and be better in my job, better leader. And within a couple months, I realized, oh, no, I think I need this woman to help me get out of this career and into a new one. And by the way, I really like what she's doing. I like this life coaching thing. So I learned more about it. This was back in 2002. And it set me on that path of eventually giving notice, leaving my full-time paying job with benefits, and making that scary leap into becoming self-employed and having my own practice. So it really was the start of me now being someone who could be a resource for other people in that same situation or similar situations. So I got my training. I set up my life to be able to launch my own business and started seeing people. First, it was just people I knew and then people that they knew. And eventually, here I am 13 years later now teaching my courses online more to reach more people. But that's really how it began and how I used my own journey and my own sense of loss and transformation and change and taking risks, all of that, used that as that personal experience to inform then what I learned in training about the best ways to support people. Things that I didn't have at the time that I wished I had had, I was now able to learn about and then share with others so that hopefully they didn't have to go through some of the challenges that I did, and hopefully certainly didn't have to end up in the hospital one day in order to make the changes required in their lives.
Right, right. And I have read your book, Ready, Set, Manifest, and I can see where this shift in your own life kind of really created that work, because it's so true to form. Like it's so practical and it's so applicable. And yet Ready, Set, Manifest is really all about when you feel stuck and you feel that you're ready to make a shift and you're not really stuck. You're in that preparation, right? You're getting ready. Mm-hmm. And that's what I love about this book. But yet one of the things that you talk about in this book is how being stuck is powerful and even sacred, and is a sacred time in a person's life. And so this, I think, reflects back to your own story and maybe how you used your story and others that you've worked with to create this. So can you talk a little bit about this paradigm and the strategies that you recommend for when someone feels stuck?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And before, when I was telling my story, and we all do this when we tell our story, we give this version that sounds like A, then B, then C, right? But what I didn't mention was that there was this huge gap, and there was this stuck phase, this place of uncertainty between, letting go of the old and finding the new. So that happens all the time. We're all experts at this. I mean, we all do this all the time. We let go of something old and we embrace something new. But it's the time when that period in between becomes extended and uncomfortable that we really start to get concerned, right? It's when it's really becomes frustrating and even unacceptable to us that we don't know the answers, that we keep asking ourselves the same questions about what's next for us, what am I meant to do, how am I meant to do it? And when no answers come, it's really disconcerting. It can even create a lot of anxiety for some people. So when I came to this paradigm, and by the way, it came out of a series of interviews I did with someone on the radio several years ago, but she was asking me some great questions, and this paradigm, this model came forward. And there are other models of transitions, like William Bridges, for example, great book on transitions, and The Way of Transition. And I found that one of the things that was missing from some other models was the enormous energy and power of that falling away time, the emptiness, the void, the neutral zone, the wilderness, whatever you want to call it. And it's been called all those things, that something was missing about what it really was the time for. And what I've come to know is that is a time when we aren't able to find the answers to the questions that we're asking. We're not able to put A plus B plus C together. Sometimes we're not even able to do the laundry in those times in our lives, because every part of us is going down deep to some really core, important work. And we literally do not have the energy, the bandwidth, or the brain power to be thinking about all the small details and to be answering big questions about what's next, because we have to be very present to what is. And there's something shifting underneath us that requires our attention. So all of our whole self goes to that place. And it looks really scary and uncomfortable because nothing's happening outwardly. Sometimes it just looks like we are literally stuck. And so the paradigm is about honoring that time, doing the tasks that are required for that time, not to move through it. And that's something I really tell a lot of people when they come to work with me, is that my job is actually not to get you unstuck. My job is to help you stay there until you get what you need. And when that happens, you will naturally move on, because it is a natural cycle. It moves. And it has its own intuition and insight and intelligence.
I love that. So I hear what you're saying about that point where people get a lot out of being stuck. I'm curious to know, though, how many of your clients are patient enough to wait there until they get what they've gotten? Just because I know that that's part of the human nature is I want, and especially our culture of instant gratification. I want it and I want it now. Give me the reasons. Tell me the solution. Like, let's do this. Chop, chop. So what do you experience when you come across the impatient client?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're right. That's just about all of them. I mean, no, because it's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to feel unsure and stuck all the time. It's not pleasant.
Right.
But one of the things that I do, I give them things to do. So I don't just say, well, we're just going to sit here together and wait for this to pass or wait for this information to come to you magically.
Right.
It's there are tasks of that phase. And for example, one of them is active waiting and really sitting with some powerful questions, not answering them, by the way. So I teach people how not to answer questions and really come up with, surface the powerful and courageous questions. And then sit with them and listen for what does come, even if it's not in the form of an answer or one that you would be expecting. So we do a lot of very active listening. I encourage people to really get in touch on an intuitive level with the messages that come to them all day long from all kinds of different sources, their own emotions, their physical body, people around them, patterns of interaction with their relationships, different synchronistic signs that can be out there, and logging them, paying attention. So they're really working hard in this phase, but they're still stuck. Right? They still don't have the answer. They still don't have the next step. But what we're doing is we're gathering. So I invite them to this process of gathering and exploring and logging the information and really paying attention. And for many of them, it's the first time they've paid this kind of close attention to themselves in their whole lives. But what this does is it ensures that they're not going to just take a step for the sake of taking a step. In other words, they're not just going to take this knee-jerk kind of action to bump themselves out of being stuck, and then 6 months later they find they're still in the same place, even if they're in a different relationship or a different job. And it's because
Right.
they have not done this deep listening work that I'm talking about.
Listening to themselves?
Yes.
Yeah. Would you say that this is the most important work that people can do when trying to go from where they are to where they want to be, or something else?
I think it's this kind of really deep, attentive listening to self and managing fear. So they go hand in hand, right? They go hand in hand because when I talked before about my story, it was scary. And if I hadn't found a way to manage that fear, I wouldn't have been able to open my eyes to the truth about needing to make that huge change in my life and in my career. So I had to manage my fear. I had to learn what that means. I had to learn to dial it back enough so that I could take steps forward. And I had to keep doing that. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize. They think that you need to get a handle on your fears for that first step, which is true, you do. But you actually have to keep on doing that because at every interval, at every plateau on your journey, something is going to come up that's going to freak you out. It's going to scare you. And you have to know in that moment how to manage that enough to keep going. So they go hand in hand, being able to manage those fears and calm yourself to a place where you can get to action, and then really being able to pay close attention to your own self, your own voice.
Right. No, I totally agree. And that listening to your own voice, sometimes the thoughts, really listening and sitting with that intuition is huge because the thoughts racing in your head can sometimes take over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So can you share a little bit more about how you support people who really struggle to know what they want? Like, how do you help people to develop clarity?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll give you a quick example. This is a little exercise I do with people. I mentioned the gathering before, so that's like a whole phase of work with people, but there's an activity I have called the gathering. And it's so easy, but I just invite people to carry a stack of blank index cards with them wherever they go. And when they're out and about, anytime something piques their interest or attracts them in some way, brings them some kind of joy in that moment, they write it down on the card, so one per card. So they're going through their day and they're noticing people they're attracted to, or colors, or music, or maybe even they're listening to something online and there's like a career that piques their interest, so they write that down. So over time, over a couple of weeks of doing this, they've got this really amazing pile of joy. And it puts you in the mindset of, first of all, you find whatever you're seeking, right? So if you're seeking the things that interest you, you're seeking joy, you're seeking your passions, and you're capturing them in the moment, then you're attracting more of that as you go. But you're getting very clear about what it is. So then when you're looking back at all of the things that you've gathered over that period of time, you'll start to see patterns. And I do this in a more specific way for people, let's say, who are looking for a new career, because then we just do the gathering about career stuff. But when it's in general, trying to connect people with that inner voice and what their true wants and desires are, I have them just do it like this very broadly, so that anything that crosses their path in the course of a day could potentially be something that they would write down on their cards as something that brings them joy and creates that spark inside of them. And that ability to notice all of the small things is the same ability that it takes to figure out what you want for the bigger things in life.
And as they're tapping into those little things, do you think that kind of helps them to build the awareness of, I know that you said all the little things kind of add up to big things, and I completely agree. But sometimes, again, going back to the impatience, there's this nudging that I've seen that happens with a lot of people where they're looking, they're like, oh, I want the big things. Have you noticed that where, for some people, the little things are
Yes.
not enough?
Absolutely, yes. The little things can be just that, very little things. They can seem disconnected, random. But what I'm talking about is the skill of listening and paying attention to what attracts a person, where the spark is, where the interest is, what is a yes for them versus what's a no. Because I'm sure you find this all the time too. Sometimes people have no clue what they want, but you ask them, okay, what don't you want? Like, what's not working? What do you want no more of in your life? And they can answer that like right away, right? So
yeah.
that's the thing, is that then people know what their no's are, but they don't know what their yeses are. So in the gathering, that's what I'm teaching people is what does it feel like when you say yes to something? When you say yes to that salad instead of the chicken burger on the menu, when you say yes to wearing blue today instead of red, whatever it is, that feeling of saying yes is something we need to tune into and really honor and recognize it when it's there, because that's that inner guidance system. And without it, it's really hard to make decisions about what you want for bigger things. It's really hard to make those decisions and trust them. And that's why we do a lot of second guessing, because we haven't owned our own process to really know deep down, yes, I want this. And this is how I know I want it. Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And, I want to dig a little bit more into Ready, Set, Manifest. And, who would that book be good for?
Particularly for people who are feeling stuck right now, who are tired of that. Maybe people who have found themselves in a situation of loss or change, maybe not even of their own doing necessarily, but they are in this place of exploring, well, what is next? And they're having some trouble figuring that out. It's also for people. So I haven't talked about the set phase, but the next place in the transition that you move into is called set. And that's where you start to prepare yourself and more answers are coming and it's time for action, but you may not know how to organize yourself around that or how to hold yourself accountable, right? So that whole section is about being able to take an idea that you have and continue to nurture it and move forward on it all the way through to the manifest phase. So anywhere in there, whether it's someone who's not sure what they want or someone who is sure but's not quite knowing what those next steps should be and what the best path is forward, those are great people that book and process is written for.
Mm-hmm. I tend to run across a lot of people who unconsciously or subconsciously self-sabotage. So how would you spot or help someone who you may see as sabotaging themselves through this process? Because they may want to move forward, but then go back into their old patterns or their own ways. So what suggestions would you have for someone who maybe is aware of a pattern that they have of sabotage, or who may be just starting to practice awareness of, oh yeah, this is something that I do? It's because of fear, right? As soon as you get close to something, the fear pops up, and then that's what I hear a lot of my clients say. So I'm wondering if it's similar for yours as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's only two choices in life that some people believe, right? And Buddhists believe that there's just fear or love.
Right.
So right. So we're in one or the other. And yes, when people get into self-sabotage, I like to ask them, what must be protected? And that question gets at something that they're afraid of. And that's what self-sabotage really is it's a misguided form, but it is a form of self-protection and preservation. So it's all about trying to cope with a fear that's underlying that, right? And fear of change is huge. So it's no wonder that when we invite people into a process that is all about transformation and change, the brakes get put on and part of us goes, wait a minute, what is happening? And then we do the self-sabotaging thing just to stay in the comfort zone. And that feels really bad. And we notice we're self-sabotaging. So you have to go into the place of an awareness about what it is that you are trying to protect when you are engaging in the self-sabotaging behaviors. And then you can ask yourself, how can I protect myself in these ways and still move forward? So there's no such thing as 100% self-protection when you're going through a transformation, because it requires you to take a risk. But there are a lot of things that we can do to set ourselves up with support and some safety measures in place so that we can be moving forward and not feel like we're totally out there like on a wire just by ourselves.
Right. And I agree there's no 100% self-protection, but also when you're going through a process of transformation, vulnerability exists. It's time to get raw. It's time to step into vulnerability. And like you said, it's uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah, it just is what it is. And there's no getting around that. And you and I are both big fans of Brené Brown and her work on vulnerability. And I think everybody in the world should read her books and listen to her talks, because it really is coming to grips with that there is no avoiding the vulnerable places when you are trying to change your life and be a better version of yourself. It just all goes together. It's just part of the recipe. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can't leave it out, because the cake's not going to turn out right. So
no,
you have to have the vulnerability in there.
And courage. I think courage is huge. I love her stuff on courage. And I think that that's a big part of your work as well. Not just in Ready, Set, Manifest, but also your call to leap, because there is that yearning. And although, you have whisper stories and promises here, but there's this courage to really take the next step. And I think that, again, we have those two choices, fear and love. And when you're in fear, courage really feels like you're climbing uphill, like with a very heavy backpack.
Yes, that's so true. Yes. Well, and we think we have to wait for courage. Mm-hmm. You know, that we just wait, we muster it, we wait for it. But really, I think a lot of times courage waits for us. And when we're doing the scary thing, you know, when we're picking up the phone to have that difficult conversation, or we're hitting submit, you know, for an online application and for something that we really want, that's when courage shows up. Courage shows up to sit beside us while we are doing the scary thing. So it's hard to think about our lives that way, because we all want it to be so much easier. I know I do. I want to feel the 100% confidence and the fearlessness before I do something, but that's hardly ever the way. It happens. It's there when you're doing it, and then that shows up. The courage shows up. The motivation, the desire kicks in, and you're doing it, and you're still scared. Part of you is still scared while you're doing it. And that's what it means.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of as you were talking, is that do it scared, because courage is really about doing it no matter what's going on, I think.
Yes. Well, and what's worth it? You know, that's the real question, is what is worth doing, even though you will be afraid while you're doing it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are so many moments that I've had with clients where it's almost like they've hit a brick wall, and really holding their hand as they really move past this invisible brick wall, because it's not physically there, it's just emotionally there. And they're trying to move past it. So whenever you've talked about exercises, which is awesome, but when someone's really trying to get past their own emotional overwhelm or their own emotional resistance, is doing an action, from your perspective, always necessary in terms of external action, or is internal action, journaling, meditating, connecting, listening to intuition, also part of that process? And do each have a separate place, or are they kind of like all smished together?
Good question. It's very much both. And I always say, you know, whenever I'm talking about action, a lot of times people hear me saying outward action, but I'm really talking about both inner and outer. And I think some of those inner actions that you just mentioned are really powerful, and they're completely necessary, especially when the outward actions aren't possible, like in the ready phase or the stuck phase I was talking about before. That is not a time to just go out and start taking action with other people or out in the world or with your job necessarily. That can be very challenging to do that, and it actually can harm your process in a way. And I don't mean, you know, nothing's beyond repair, but, you know, in that moment it may not be the best thing that you need. So taking inner action instead is way more helpful and powerful and effective for what you might be needing to move into next in a personal growth type of way. So yeah, when you're completely overwhelmed by emotion or unsure, you know, the fear is so great. A lot of the exercises that I am talking about and that I teach, sorry about that, are have to do with those inner reflections and the actions that are about processing, about where you choose to put your attention. So a lot of intention setting and, you know, really reflecting. And that active inner listening I was talking about before, you know, someone could see you going through that process or be aware of you going through that process, and they're a friend of yours, let's say, but they wouldn't necessarily see anything outwardly, maybe not for a while, but there's a lot happening inside and with your own thoughts and the way that you're processing and framing your own situation.
Right. No, I think I agree with you. And I think the internal process is just as important as the external process. And as you were going through, your own process, and as someone who has taken pretty big leaps in life, which one was hardest for you, and what did you learn in the process?
Yeah. So starting my own business or becoming a mother, that's a toss up there. They're actually kind of very similar. Neither one came with a manual. I remember that. Right. There was very little rewards in the beginning for a lot of effort. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, well, I'll just speak for, starting my own business, becoming self-employed. That was super scary. It happened to be at a time when my then partner had decided didn't want to be with me anymore. So I no longer had that support financially and otherwise. And I was really on my own, trying to make my own living by myself, cover all the expenses by myself. And it was so frightening. So I think that what I learned is what we were just talking about a moment ago, which is I could not afford to wait around to be fearless and to be completely confident and brave. I had to just do it, because to me it was worth doing even though I was terrified. It was worth doing even though I didn't know exactly how I was going to make it work. And so sometimes we just need to know what are those things that are so important to us that we need to stand up in that way in our own lives, no matter the amount of discomfort or fear that we will feel along the way. We have a trust, we have a knowing about this bigger thing that we are leaning into and that we want so much. And it's a leap of faith is really what it is. So I think that that's really what I learned in that those leaps are about, first and foremost, a leap of faith.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I had heard that entrepreneurship, I heard and I know that entrepreneurship is really, it's all about personal development. It really is. Because if you don't know yourself really well, it's like a crash course in personal development is what I've heard. And I know from living it, breathing it like yourself, is that there's no instruction manual. There's no booklet that comes with it. You just dive right in. And so I get that. And it's also about recognizing, and that's why I love your book, Ready, Set, Manifest, because I think there are different points in that process where you're stuck and then you're set and you're manifesting and you're moving forward. And then it's like this cycle, you kind of cycle through it. And I think parenting is very much the same, just figuring it out as you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we need to be able to trust ourselves that we're totally capable of doing that. I mean, who told us that we needed to have a manual and full set of instructions for every single thing in our lives? I mean, but we think that. We think that we're not prepared unless we know how to do it completely, confidently, and that we know what comes next and what's the proper tool to use for that. And, but the truth of the matter is that that's not really how we live our lives. I mean, how did you learn how to drive a stick shift? How did you learn to diaper a baby? You might have taken a class or two, but you learn through the doing.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I can remember learning how to drive a stick shift, and there was no class. It was just doing it. It was just taking those action steps. And yeah, there's fear there because you don't know, oh, am I going to hurt the car? That whole process, but you've got to just plow through it and then really master it. So I think a lot of this is also about self-mastery, understanding oneself, and really going back to what you said is listening to those intuitive nudges and doing the inner work that really spurns or really brings out the outer work and I love what you said about you're not sitting and waiting, because it's not a waiting process. You're taking action, but you're also listening to that intuition and that internal guidance to also recognize what those next steps are, because you're not just going to arbitrarily take steps.
No. Well, and if you do, you risk making lateral moves throughout your life, where, you know what a lateral move is, where
Yep.
you're right. And so it's not worth it in the end. That's why so many times I've seen people who come to me and they said, well, I did change, I've changed jobs, but I still am not happy, or I feel like I'm missing something. And it's because they kept making these lateral moves despite their increase in income and all the promotions they were getting. Inside, it was a lateral move.
Yeah. And so in working with your clients, what would you say, of course, keeping their information private? Do you have any stories of anyone who after making lateral moves, that they really recognized how to break out of that pattern?
Yeah. Yeah, I met with a man, this was a few years ago, and he was in corporate world. He had been part of a lot of startups, doing accounting stuff and, chief financial officer, that kind of work. And he was at this place where he just didn't know really what he wanted, but he was not as happy as he thought he would be at this stage in his life. And so we worked together. He did the Ready, Set, Manifest curriculum. We went through that process paired with some individual coaching, and he got himself to the point where he was able to take a year-long sabbatical to New Zealand. He completely changed his life. He gave up his apartment. You can imagine what it would take to pick up and leave for a year. And he had to do a lot of things financially to prepare for that. It was a journey for sure. But this is where he was led after that period of really paying attention to what he wanted and following that guidance from one thing to the next. He didn't start out working with me saying, I'm going to spend a year in New Zealand. That came that came out of this process. So look at that. I mean, look at what can get born from, it seems like nothing, or from a nothingness, a period of uncertainty, some brilliant idea like a year sabbatical in New Zealand working on organic farms. Hey, that's amazing. So that got born out of that process. And then after that, he ended up moving across the country from the West Coast to the East Coast and getting a brand new job working with a hospital and doing amazing. So, not only is it possible, but we do know how to do this if only we can give ourselves permission. And this is the real hard part, I think, is to give ourselves permission to listen that closely to what we really want. Because it's not always just about us, right? Especially as women, we have other people in our lives always that we tend to or feel like we have to tend to. And we can't just, I certainly couldn't just pick up and move to New Zealand for a year. Mm-hmm. However, but what is my thing? What is my New Zealand for a year dream? Mm-hmm. So, and if I don't give myself permission to even know what that is, I'm certainly never going to have it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I hear you there. And I love that. And I think that it's so huge because like you said, and I've had clients like that too, where they come in and that's not the reason they came, but exactly what was birthed from uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And it's just amazing to see people flourish and grow and step into their power and step into who they are. And like you said, neither one of us can think about, okay, I'm going to go to New Zealand for a year, especially when you have family commitments and children. But that's an amazing step that he took for himself after listening to that inner guidance and that inner wisdom. So on that note, do you have any tips or journal prompts that someone could start off with? Because I know that you have a ton in Ready, Set, Manifest, and we will, as we wrap up, I will direct people so that they can access it. I know it's on Amazon. But what do you where should they start? What would be a good question for them to write about?
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's so many. I love questions. And so I mentioned one earlier. What do you love more than you fear? I don't think I phrased it quite like that, but that is one of my very favorite questions. What do you love more than you fear? Another question is, what wants to be born? So instead of thinking about what do I want to create or what do I want to do next, or what wants to be born in my life? And again, when I pose these kind of questions to people, I don't invite them to give me their answer right away. I just snap my fingers, so hopefully that doesn't mess up the audio. No. But I invite them to sit with the question. I want to know how that question feels in them. And I want to know how they respond to it with their whole self. So when I say, what wants to be born in you, in your life at this time, and you take a breath and you hold that question, sometimes people start to cry. And they have no words yet. That's great. I mean, it's not great that they're crying, but you know what I mean. They're connecting with something. They're connecting with something real, something powerful, something knowing. It's a knowing in them that they're starting to open up. So that's all that questions are for. They're not for you to find the right answer. They're to show you the way. And the way is a process. It's a journey. So, and if people are interested, I have a whole process of these questions. I've got tons of questions, but one of the best ways to access them is if people are kind of listening with this ear around the fear part, and that's showing up for people. I really would encourage people to take advantage of my free 3-day challenge. It's called Fear Less, Live More. And you can do it in 3 days or you can pace that out. But there are some really powerful questions in that process, dialogues that you can have with your fear, for example, and different exercises. I take you through 7 of my fear taming strategies. And if you're interested in that, you can sign up at fearless3days.com. It's just a great way to get a handle on this and really beginning to hear what's behind the fear, what's on the other side of the fear, so that you don't have to be blocked all the time by just your fear thoughts, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I love that. And then if they were to access it, is it Fearless3 THREE, or is it the number 3?
Just the number 3. Yep. Fearless, the number 3days.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And do you have any other upcoming programs or offers that you'd like to share? And then also be sure to tell us where we can find Ready, Set, Manifest. Mm-hmm,
sure. So I consider that Fearless program to be kind of a prerequisite, actually, for a lot of the things that I do. It's so important, just like what we've been talking about today. It's foundational. So I usually have people go through that first. It's free, no risk to them. If they like it, that tells me 2 things. It tells me that they're ready for what's next, but it also tells me that my style and my approach is a good fit for them. So that's always something you want to check out first before you start to, move forward with someone with a course or a program. But then after that, in mid-January, and I believe it'll start the week of the 17th, yes, I have my Make It So program. So once people get their fears in check, and that's not this huge barrier anymore, then it's time to really put things together. Okay, well, how am I going to move forward and what's the process? So that's kind of a way to set those goals up in practical, bite-sized ways, but continue moving forward with them with a sense of personal accountability. So that's coming in the new year for my folks. Yeah.
And this is the time when everybody's shifting and changing and ready for 2017. We're about to leap into 2017. And so I know that at the beginning of the new year, so many people are scrambling into New Year's resolutions. And I know you, like myself, are all about long-term lasting change, not this short-lived resolution stuff.
Yeah. It's overwhelming. It's not effective. I forget what the percentage is, but it's super high of people who will set a resolution and then by come the end of February, it's completely gone. It's sad, and it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way at all. If we set our intentions around where, I always ask people and said at this time of year, I said, what do you want to pay attention to in the new year? Just that. Mm-hmm. What do you want to pay attention to? And that it can be way more effective than, the standard, I want to lose 10 pounds or I want to, I don't know, save for a trip to Italy, which is a great goal, by the way. I would love to do that too.
Yeah. Well, and I've had clients who, say they want to date again or manifest their ideal partner, or there's so many things. Start a business, have a baby. There's so many things that can come in the new year. However, I think that the new year, because of the holidays, and I actually talked about this a couple weeks ago on the show, because holiday eating is something where people tend to gain weight over the holidays. And so then January, the most common New Year's resolution is, like you said, lose 10 pounds or maybe even more, because it's really getting back to that routine. That's when most gym memberships are purchased, but it's too much all at once. And so that's why I really love your method, because it's seeking that inner guidance, that inner wisdom, and also asking the questions, sitting with the questions, and really going deeper. Because I think the resolutions are very surface, and they're very, action is good. And I know you agree with that, but the courageous action is so much deeper and juicier and meatier than, okay, I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to eat lettuce every day.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you on that. Absolutely.
And I also will tell my clients and everyone here, like, it's so difficult if you're used to eating cheeseburgers every day to going from cheeseburgers to salad like that, in the snap of a fingers, and okay, I'm never having this again. And I think that that's unrealistic. And so where resolutions are about this drastic change, and change is something that, and I don't know if you agree with this, but you ease into, because so much of that drastic change, it throws people into a spiral, and the pattern that they're used to is what's in their, neurologically. And I know, this as well as you're an LCSW. Those are things that neurologically, those are the patterns and the habits. And so shifting those behaviors require like this new habit forming, new behavioral change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely has to be that inner and outer, and back and forth and back and forth. It's a continual process. And, there's just so many expectations around that, and so many ways where we can set ourselves up to fail instead of to succeed. And that's not what we should be about. We should be, what is the thing that will support me to have the next best version of myself, and that it's the healthy part of that I'm interested in people. It's like, where's the true health, the whole health of the person, and how can we have a little bit more of that? How can you start having that and living that now, instead of waiting for the scale to show a number that you want, or instead of waiting for the ideal partner to show up, or instead of waiting for that great job offer. What are you missing now that you could be living and having, maybe in small ways at first, but it's all about experience, right? How can you be experiencing parts of that right now?
That's a great question. That's a great question for everyone to journal and think about and dig deeper on. So where can people find you? And Ready, Set, Manifest is on Amazon. I know that, but where can people find you? Where do you hang out on social media, your website, etc.?
Yeah, well, I'll make it real easy for everybody. So you keep hearing Kristen talk about Ready, Set, Manifest. You can find me at readysetmanifest.com. And that's also the name of my Facebook page, so you can find me there. It's also the name of a private Facebook group I have. So if you're in there on Facebook and you're searching for groups, you can type in Ready, Set, Manifest. You'll find me there. We have a little community that's growing. I offer support there. I do mini live lessons. It's really fun. They sometimes are my guinea pigs, I'm afraid, but they don't seem to mind. So it's just a great group for me to ask them questions about what's working and what's not working from my material, and they give me great feedback, and they support one another too, which is really awesome. So I love that group. So yeah, that's where people can find me. I have more about me at debbielacy.com, but because, that can be hard to spell if you're putting the wrong E's or something in there. I just send people to readysetmanifest.com and they'll find me there.
Awesome. And I'm so glad that you came on today, shared your story, and shared so much more about the Fear Less, Live More challenge, because I know that especially this time of year, a lot of people are struggling with anxiety and stress and figuring out what their next steps are in the new year. So I think that challenge will be great for everyone. And so I just thank you for coming on and sharing your message, because I love your work.
Oh, it's Mutual Admiration Society for sure. Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciated the time with you here today.
Thank you, Debbie. And thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been another great show. To continue the conversation, hop on over to the Seekers group on Facebook, www.facebook.com/groups/mindset alchemy. And remember, you are meant for more. And until next time, keep seeking.
Thanks for tuning in to Meant for More, the Seeker's Guide to Success. But the fun doesn't end here. Head over to KristenLloyd.com for your Seeker's Guide workbook filled with exercises to help you go from mediocre to magically magnificent.